Hi, everybody. My name is Ian O'Byrne. I'm the Multiliteracies Department Editor for the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. Once again, I have four questions for some experts in the field, and these are two people that we know and love in the JAAL community. Margaret and Emily, you want to introduce yourselves, please?
Hi, I'm Emily Skinner.
And I'm Margaret Hagood. We're co-editors of the Journal.
Thank you very much for joining me. This is an honor and a privilege to have you on. The purpose of these discussions is that I wanted to promote dialogue and discussion about the columns. So one of the first questions that I had was, in the column I talk about providing a space for students to act as readers and writers of online information. If we were to create this space, if we were to look at a classroom where students were able to do this and they were empowered to do this, what would that look like?
So, in the early 2000s, there was an article by William Kist in JAAL about classrooms looking more like studio spaces, and I think that's a way that this could start, thinking of students having all the tools available to them in the classroom. In this age, that would be laptops and iPads and whatever devices they might bring on their own, and have different configurations within the classroom where they could be working in groups or working independently when they need to work independently, that it would have a more casual atmosphere than I think we've sometimes had in the past, so that they can move between these different technologies and offline work as well.
And part of that is this idea of what personalized learning looks like, and growing the individual as a learner and a producer of content through personalized learning using people like Bob Marzano's work, and so that kids can have goals and produce with content that is meaningful to them, that also meets standards that they and the teachers are accountable for and to, and have a much broader audience and reach of the content that they produce, because it can be in online spaces where they're allowed to be able to share it with others.
And additionally, if we are to have this type of environment, we need to support it outside of the classroom, so that students if you say bring your own device, so that students can then use those devices when they're not at school, so that there's places around the community where there is internet access available to everyone. Margaret and I went to a conference a couple years ago about bring your own device in a school district that had done this in Texas, and part of the important thing was that there would be internet access all around the community as well as just in the school, so that that work can go beyond the school doors and is accessible to everyone.
Thank you. One of the challenges that we'll always have is access and policies and permissions for students. So if we were to create this environment, if we were to make these spaces or develop these studios in classrooms, those of us that work in pre-service teacher education, or those of us that do PD for schools, what do we have to do? How do we support teachers to prepare them to succeed and lead their students in these spaces, in these studios?
You know, it's interesting, and I think that it's definitely a multi-pronged approach. Certainly within teacher education courses, it is incumbent upon us as teacher educators to include these sorts of technologies in our courses. Just because we're teaching students who are supposedly digital natives does not mean that they understand how to use these kinds of texts and tools pedagogically. They might understand how to create something for themselves, but they certainly don't understand how to use it in a way that would meet the needs of multiple other people, as opposed to themselves as an end user. And so we've got to insert that into our coursework, not as a separate technology class, although there are many places that still have a separate technology course within a teacher education program, but actually within the content and disciplines in which we teach, so that students will get very, very clear pedagogical understanding of how to use these sorts of resources in their own instruction. And then secondly, there's that idea of in-service. So what do we have to do in the in-service world? And Emily and I both work a lot with professional development and working in schools, and so that's a multi-pronged approach as well. So not only do we need to provide professional development courses in schools, in lab schools, out in the community for teachers to go to that are already there in their schools, so that we, as the folks who are promoting certain kinds of technologies, can see what they have access to and what they don't have access to, and work through the affordances and challenges of being within that community. But secondly, we also need to be able to provide them in classroom support that moves beyond just the PD that says, great, I'm there 1 day a week from 3 to 5. When kids aren't here, we can talk about things, and the next week you can report on how it goes. There needs to be that interim step where we're also supporting teachers in classroom practice.
Yeah, and so if I can just add on to that, from experiences like Margaret referenced with working with teachers, there is this constant back and forth where you're at the school, you meet with the teachers, you're in the classroom, and then setting up Google Sites to share resources with teachers, so that, again, the support is when we're there and when we're not there, and connects back to coursework at the colleges. As far as the pre-service teachers, again, we always have to be mindful of this issue of access. So we're fortunate at our college where the library has provided this iPad checkout program that you can apply for as course instructors to expose students to working with iPads within the courses, and we've done that across our courses. It's for a finite time. So we've also had to, within our program, set up a scholarship for students who purchasing one of these devices would be prohibitive. So we've got to constantly be thinking of, we're going to use these resources, how do we make sure that they're available to everyone?
And honestly, in short, teacher education needs to change. Teacher education needs to wholly change in order to be able to do the work that needs to be done to prepare students for life that is already happening. Not like even life in the future, but things that are already happening.
Well said. I definitely agree with you. It's much of what we see, many of the challenges are just changing our paradigms about teaching and learning and literacy. The individual skill use, tool use, and knowledge, those are the easy parts. It's changing our paradigms. So shifting a little bit in our focus, but also this leads into the next question. In the column, I try to make the case that we should have students not only reading online content, but also writing or constructing or responding to something that people say online, or remixing it, or whatever word we want to use, having a space and empowering our students so that they feel that they could and should respond to and remix what they read online. What are your thoughts about that?
So during our editorship, one of our big goals has been to highlight this idea of production and not just consumption of internet resources and online reading materials, and so we've tried to feature a lot of articles that help teachers, help practitioners with, so how do you explicitly teach students how to engage in online research, how to make sense of it, how to critique the credibility of it, and then how do you make something out of it. There's a recent or an upcoming article by DeSchreier that gets at, it's titled Web-Mediated Knowledge and Synthesizing for Teacher Educators. And so I think that there needs to just be a lot of explicit teaching about those practices and mucking around with those practices. I think it also opens up the space for in and out of school connections when we think about the disciplines. If you are having your language, your course is teaching Spanish, and so your students are doing research on world leaders in Spanish-speaking countries, that's going to go back and forth between what they can be doing at school and at home as far as doing the research. Same thing across science, social studies, all of the content areas. It just really needs to be more fluid as far as drawing upon their out-of-school literacy practices and being able to connect the online research they do for their own purposes and their own interests out of school with the curricular academic content that teachers are assigning in school.
And then secondly, there is that whole aspect of connections between foundational and digital or new literacies, and understanding what copyright is, understanding what plagiarism is, understanding how to take those particular ideas, whether they're traditional or non-traditional is sort of irrelevant. Understanding what the rules of engagement are with those areas, and helping students to better understand how they have to be able to remix and remake content in a way that also plays by those rules.
Well said. I mean, it's one of the challenges, and Emily brought it up, is that there is a certain amount of play and mucking about in digital content to make sense of it. You know, we are in two models here. We're in between two models. We're trying to figure out what it means to read and write online, and there's all these different tools that pop up every day and tools that fall off. So the individual construction of content or producing content is one thing, but this leads into bigger issues, broader issues about identity. And so one of the, what do students need to know, what do teachers need to know about producing content and publishing it online, and identity construction?
Yeah, I think that this is a really big one, and I think it's a big one because it goes way beyond the idea of producing for the sake of producing, and it goes way beyond the idea of completing an assignment because someone has said something to you. But identity is so personal, and with that, we need to better understand and better teach students and open up more spaces for that discussion of what is an identity, how does it get constructed, how does it construct you, how do we actively construct it on our own, and how do we want to put ourselves out there. And certainly the aspects of safety are important, but also there are the aspects of individuality and the aspects of diversity, and that you might be one person in your day-to-day life moving about the world, but you might be a very different person in an online community, and that's not necessarily always bad. Lots of folks, especially when we're working with K-12, folks think that it has to be a seamless identity from one place to the other. And the more work we do with understanding how our identities change, even in traditional context, right? So I'm reading or writing in a traditional means for this particular audience, might look different across different spaces and different audiences. Similarly, that happens in online communities. Unfortunately, we don't spend a lot of good time working through that. I think that we are under this veil or this guise of, oh gosh, there's safety issues. We've got to deal with the safety issues. And so identity gets put under the aspects of ethics with safety as opposed to ethics with understanding self, being true to oneself, and understanding how the community works. The second bigger issue there, from my perspective, is how do schools and school systems put together policy that works for everyone. And I say that because it becomes an issue if one teacher is doing something in one way and another teacher is doing something in another way, and they actually conflict with each other in terms of what they're teaching kids about identity construction online. And not to say that kids can't take disparate ideas and make their own sense of them, but especially if it's something that is connected to schools need, and school districts need to have those hard conversations to put together policies that actually work for everyone.
Yeah, and I'll just, again, during the past couple volumes of JAAL, we've really tried to feature authors' articles that tell the stories of students and teachers from diverse backgrounds, and a lot of it has been about identity and how there are different identities related to gender, race, social class, abilities, ethnicity, all of it, how that really impacts their literacy practices and their experiences at schools. And so I think the more we learn about different experiences, the better we're able to take different identities into account and make sense of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you to the viewers out there. Please read the column, read all the elements of JAAL. Come on out and respond to these videos. Let's see your own video responses on YouTube. And please share it out on the social networks. Once again, thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Ian.